You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore, and today we have our guest, Liz Benjamin. Liz is currently the managing director at Marathon Strategies, a communications and research firm. Before that, she was the host of Capital Tonight, a TV show that aired nightly on Spectrum News and focused on New York politics and policy. Benjamin was also the creator and editor of State of Politics, the show's companion blog. Prior to joining Spectrum News, Benjamin worked for 4 years at the New York Daily News and for 10 years at the Albany Times Union, where she covered everything from towns to Albany City Hall to the state capitol, and she launched Capitol Confidential, the first blog focused on state politics operated out of the Capitol. Welcome, Liz.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, thank you. So as your bio said, you have been a reporter, an interviewer, asking tough questions on Spectrum's Capital Tonight, to now helping others communicate their message at Marathon Strategies. So tell us a little bit about your career thus far and this evolution.
Well, I spent 2 decades roughly in the media and saw a lot of changes. One thing that happens when people read my bio and my history, I always think about how old I am. Somehow I'm not sure how that occurred, but I managed to get here to a couple years shy of 50, and still healthy, thank goodness, particularly at this moment in time. But a lot has changed. I mean, when I started, there were no such things as blogs. There were no such things as social media platforms or Twitter or Facebook or podcasts or streaming television or any of that, right? TikTok, forget it. I mean, if somebody had said to you that like someday there was going to be this like thing that we all be obsessed with, that I don't even know how we would have described it to each other at the time. And that definitely has changed the way that people communicate. Messages need to be sharper. They need to be clearer to cut through the noise, certainly. And they need to be more focused. It's not going to be useful to try to impact people or convince them of something when they have so little time to focus on your message and really so little bandwidth to when so much else is coming at them and competing for their attention.
So speaking about messaging and how we get our message out there, our show covers an array of topics, all related to social work and social justice in some way, be it having a local nonprofit come on and share information about the services they provide, to interviewing experts in the field about new research or interventions. And one of the goals of the radio show is to help other social workers and those in related fields to share their message with the public. And we want to be able to provide a platform for individuals and agencies to get their message out to those who might not ever have considered seeing or using a social worker or know about services that an agency provides. So social work is all about connecting others, and this show is one of the ways that we do that. So given your background, what are ways that we as social workers can get our content, be it about certain programs that an agency has to offer or wanting to raise awareness about certain issues that we're advocating for? How can we help connect with the media?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to make sure that you understand your audience. I mean, who are the people that you're trying to get your message to, right? So this is sort of a ham-handed example, but it would not be helpful for you to try to pitch your story as a social worker to a sports reporter, somebody who covers arena football, for example. I mean, I'm sure that arena football players have stresses and perhaps they need social workers. And maybe you could make a pitch if, in fact, you were specifically offering a service or some kind of therapy that was tailored for arena football players. But generally speaking, what you want to do is make sure that you know who you're trying to reach and then identify the people who speak to that audience most directly, right? So I would not want to, one of the most frustrating things as a reporter is to get sort of these blast pitches usually from agencies like mine, actually like the one that I'm in now, and who clearly had no idea who I was or what I did or what Capital Tonight was all about, my previous perch, or what I was interested in. I mean, not only did I cover politics and policy, but I had, if you watched in a fairly regular way, you knew that I had some areas that I was particularly passionate and interested in. And those were areas that you probably were going to have a good opportunity to get me to listen to you on. The other potential thing that you could think about is what we call in the business news hooks, which I think that a lot of people have probably heard the term. A news hook is really nothing more than what is pertinent about what you are trying to say or sell or get out there in terms of the current atmosphere, the current news cycle. Now, the news cycle is a 24/7, basically, every 60 seconds, everything is changing. So you have a lot of opportunities to get into that cycle. Right now, for example, the cycle is incredibly focused on the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's influencing all of us. It's like a great equalizer. Now, there are also different strata of people within the pandemic, and people are being influenced and impacted in different ways, which is a different conversation. But if I were a social worker, I would think to myself, I have an incredible service to offer here. How is it that I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get that message out? I'm not going to offer a service or a message that's not tailored to the moment in which we're living.
And that's really important for us to know. But so many times as nonprofits, when I speak with individuals, they're like, well, how do I get that message out? Where do I start? And sometimes as social workers, we're used to being in that clinical setting, that one-on-one, and not really engaging with the media or sharing our expertise and putting ourselves out there. So strategies like this helps people to know where at least to start.
Right. But let's say also you have a specific focus because, social work is a grand umbrella of mm-hmm. people who operate in various different areas. And then underneath that umbrella, there are specialties or niches, I would assume. Right. Mm-hmm. So maybe you're someone who specializes in women's issues, or maybe you're someone who specializes in geriatric depression, or maybe you're someone who specializes in substance abuse. Now, all of those particular issues are getting impacted and exacerbated in certain ways in this moment of pandemic that we're all facing, right? We're isolated. And so maybe we're thinking, hey, it's 1:00. That makes it time for a drink somewhere, or what have you, right? Or if you're older and if you're living in a nursing home, then perhaps you're really feeling endangered, or you're feeling isolated because you can't see your grandkids or what have you. All of these areas of specialty, there are ways to speak to them, but the more specialized you can be and pointed in your message, the better opportunity you have in getting it across to the audience that you want to influence.
And that's important that you just mentioned that we're a very broad profession, and it's not just about clinical therapy. And we also need to know what's going on in news and in politics so we can help make macro level change, because everything that happens at the policy level influences and impacts our clients directly. So you've interviewed a number of politicians, you've wrote blogs and content about these important issues. So what are ways that social workers can become involved in this world where we can best serve our clients and make change at the macro level?
Well, I mean, again, this is a conversation where you can start at a very high level. I mean, the first thing that you can do is vote. Yeah. And people who watch me on the show probably are tired of hearing me say that. They're thankful that I'm no longer on the air so I can stop berating people on this particular issue. But it is my personal public service announcement. You really don't have, first of all, we have an unusual opportunity and a right in this country that other countries don't have, as freedom to express ourselves in this way, and freedom to take people out of office and put them there in order to represent our interests. But if you do not exercise that right, then really you don't have as much of a right to complain. I mean, certainly you pay taxes probably, and so therefore you might have more arguably more of a platform than you, even if you don't vote. But still, I mean, that's the first way that you influence the public sphere, is to exercise your own power, as limited as you think it is, as it is. And I have to say, people say, oh, my vote doesn't matter, I shouldn't bother. And then you see elections that are swung by 1 or 2 votes. So particularly at the local level where turnout tends to be lower. So
and those are some of the most important elections sometimes. Correct. Those are the ones that impact us more greatly at the local level.
Correct. Right. And so then the next thing, when you sort of get down, go down the rungs of the ladder is organization and participation. I mean, one of the ways, and I think even higher than that would be information. You need to inform yourself. It's hard to make influence policy or influence decisions that are made if you don't know the people who are making them, and you don't know what their ideology is, and you don't know the issues on the table. If you're not aware of anything outside the sphere of your own expertise, it's going to be difficult for you to try and influence people. And I guess the example of that would be, I want to get elected official X to pay attention to me. Well, I need to get an in with that person. I need to know what they care about and what makes them tick and what their influences are. Maybe they have a high population that is interested in the service that I am providing. And so I can activate that population, or at least point to the fact, hey, you've got a lot of constituents who care about what I'm trying to tell you. So that's another opportunity, information. And then subsequently, participation in organization. Now, these days it's difficult to encourage people to get out there and go to your local, council meeting because nobody's going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Some of these meetings are being held online. There's certainly a concern about small d democracy and the erosion of such when we're living in such an isolated way, and decisions are continuing to be made somewhere out there, and the public's not able to watch that happen, which is why the Fourth Estate, my former employers, are so important. And journalists are putting their own lives on the line in a contracting industry at a scary time, so they can continue to keep readers and viewers and listeners informed, which is important. And I hope that people recognize that. Just shout out to my former colleagues. And then I guess organization, if there's an association, you should join it. There's more power in numbers. If you're just one voice, screaming into the void, then you have slightly less influence than if you're 20 voices, and you have a lot less influence than your 200,000 voices. And given the fact that we are all online, that is a little bit of a flattener, because you do have the capability of, DMing a person or just getting into their Twitter space and communicating with them. I mean, you could communicate with anybody because we're all sort of hanging around out there in the interwebs. But usually it's a brick and mortar experience of the state capitol, and you have to go to the capitol and make yourself known. And if there's an organization that does that, it's a little bit easier.
And you, speaking about staying informed, you do a really good job at helping to keep people informed through one of the topic of my next question, which will be your Rise and Shine daily emails through CivMix.
People love that thing. Why?
That is the way I get my whole new, every morning it comes and I read it and I know what's going on. And I click on the links and I find out more information. And it's a really good way because it's, even though I'm not in the political world, you break it down in a way that I can easily understand. I read it and I'm like, okay, that's the news that I need to know for the day. Some of the important topics. And for our listeners, we're going to go into this. What is this Rise and Shine email? So Liz is one of the brains behind CivMix, a new news source that covers what's going on in the capital region, the world, and everything in between. And aside from our website and the daily email that I was just talking about, it includes a podcast called The Mix, which has interviews with politicians, business owners, and everyday people. So tell us a little bit more about CivMix and how social workers can use forms of media such as blog posts, podcasts, and social media to help get their messages out.
So, the internet is really amazing. It used to be when you wrote for a Dead Tree publication, which is how I got my start, that you really had to stick to the length that they gave you. They'd assign you in New York tabloid land. When I worked for the Daily News, sometimes they would be like, right, give me 250 words. 250 words. I mean, Lord, I could burp that. Like, that's nothing, right? Who could tell a story in 250 words? Or in television, give me a 2-minute package. That's not a long time. Although in TV, 2 to 3 minutes is actually an eternity. You learn to find out. The internet is just this endless maw that you can fill and fill and fill and fill and fill. And many people do, with just endless screeds of information and words. And it's difficult because everybody has the same amount of access to it, generally speaking. I don't want to get in too much to that particular third rail. But if you are, I don't know, a stay-at-home mom and you write a mom blog and people just love it and it becomes viral, you could then get yourself a book deal. I mean, it's anything could happen on the internet. And so it is an opportunity for people to really get out there. And it's not difficult to make your own website, to make your own newsletter, to make your own blog, to make a podcast. It's really not all that hard. There are tools out there to assist you. And, I am lucky because Joe Bonilla, who is my partner in crime with CivMix, and he's the brains behind Relentless Awareness, as some people might know him better. He's more technically savvy than I am. Thankfully, I'm not a real technocrat, but it isn't that difficult. You can inform yourself in terms of how to use these tools. CivMix arose because of the unfortunate death of Oliver Albany and some other independent media in this region. And I think there's a real need for local journalism and local news stories. There's a hunger to know what happens around the corner. And because of the contracting media landscape, we're not getting as much of that as we used to, at least in the way that we used to get it. There used to be a lot of dailies and weeklies that were small. They can't compete anymore, and they're folding. And so if you really want to know news about what's happening in your neighborhood or in your community, you've got to rely on online sources, generally speaking, to get that. And there are some amazing websites that do all of sorts of information, arts information and entertainment information and news information and sports information. I mean, there are blogs about everything and websites about everything these days. But that was why we created CivMix, to try and fill that space. Rise and Shine is a morning newsletter that's more or less an aggregation. I've been doing this since my days at Capital Confidential, which is a really long time ago. It's a service for myself as much as it is for the people who read it. And I'm always amazed because when I write it, it's like, these are the things I'm interested in. I mean, obviously there are so many headlines, and what you get when you read Rise and Shine is my assessment of what is important and pertinent to the readership as I understand it. And, generally speaking, to my worldview. So you might get some quirky stuff at the top about the day of the week or what happened on this day in history. I used to do celebrity birthdays, but I don't anymore because I don't really have space. COVID-19 is taking up a lot of space. I usually tell people what the weather report is, just because those are the kind of things that I want to know to start my day.
It's enjoyable.
And when I'm done collating this information, I feel like I have a pretty firm grasp on where things are going, at least in the short term, to drive the news cycle and drive the discussion for at least the first 6 hours of how the day is going to progress.
Well, I enjoy it. I have my families gets an email every day as well for the Rise and Shine. So it's a really good way to stay informed. And you've also now transitioned to podcast. I'm in the podcast world. So welcome to the podcast family with The Mix. How has that been going, and what can people expect for that? Because I think some of our listeners who listen to their social workers might also really enjoy The Mix.
Well, I have to say, podcasts, I came late to podcasts. I love them. I think they're fascinating. I hope Joe and I are just getting into it, and it's a pretty straightforward interview show at this point, which is something that I did for almost 10 years at Spectrum, and really, I think was probably my strength. I was never a great teleprompter reader, unfortunately, and I'm not a born newscaster, but talking to people and getting them to open up about, or grilling them if they were elected officials. Generally speaking, I didn't like to hold the feet of regular folks to the fire. I don't think that they sign up for that. But if you do sign up to be a politician, then, you're fair game. I started really listening to podcasts because I started training for ultra marathons, and I needed something to listen to. And I got into some great ones there. I just can't say enough about how amazing some of them are. I just got hooked on one called Ologies that if you haven't listened to it, you really should.
I have heard of that one. Yes.
Amazing. It's about science, and it's like an hour and a half long interview about a scientist who focuses their entire life on like scatology. And for an hour and a half, you're riveted about a scientific discussion about poop. I mean, how could that not be interesting? Animal poop, generally speaking. As somebody who actually works in a zoo, I mean, it was just, and the amount of interesting information that a really good interviewer can get out of a subject who you might think isn't necessarily the most interesting person is kind of confounding. And then also to weave in, I mean, there's of course This American Life, which is amazing and started as a radio show. It also interweaves a lot more sort of, or Radio Lab, which is another one that I love. These are NPR shows. or Criminal, which is another one that is great. They usually use a lot more sound and sort of what we would call B-roll in the industry and ambient noise. I'd like us to get into a little bit more of that. Joe's probably sweating as I say this, like, oh, Benjamin, stop making so much work for me. But to tell stories, it's a medium to tell a story and to illuminate areas of the world that are so fascinating, and we know so little about what other people are doing. It just gives us an opportunity to really delve deeply into somebody else's thought pattern, and that's always fascinating.
Well, I will definitely be listening. I believe it comes out every Monday, correct? The Mix, and it's available on iTunes as well.
Yep, true. And we talked to some influencing people, such as the Lieutenant Governor. We spoke to her last week, and about some difficult topics like how the pandemic had exacerbated the upstate-downstate divide, which is really a concern personally of mine. But Joe, thankfully, he has a really wide network of folks who are engaged in the restaurant industry and the arts and hospitality. And we talked to those folks too. And they're just fascinating people. Creative people are amazing. If I could sing or paint or dance or do anything useful in that way, I would be so happy. But I get to access that desire by talking to others.
Well, thank you for this. I mean, we're running out of time, but I want to thank you for sharing information for social workers to help us navigate. We always say we want social workers to be the media and engaged in media to help get our message out there. And you help break that down, how we can do that. And you also showed that you can create your own media. With CivMix, you've created a website, a blog, a podcast as a way to help get your message out there. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing all this valuable information with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Again, for our listeners, we are with Liz Benjamin, who is the managing director at Marathon Strategies. She has an amazing bio, from hosting Capitol Tonight to being a reporter at the New York Daily News and the Times Union. So thank you so much, Liz.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.